Okay, we are going to talk about negation. Another way of saying negation is to say we are going to do the opposite. So negation is the opposite. When we negate and ors, then they switch to the other one, and that's called DeMorgan's laws. So recall that our symbol for opposite, we can either use the word not, and that's what our textbook likes to do. We can use the computer science philosophy symbol, that's this little mark, or the squiggly in front, which is often used by math people. Really, they can be used interchangeably. Usually we don't use the word not, but we read these two symbols as not. So DeMorgan's laws, the two DeMorgan's laws are that if we do not, for an and statement, P and Q, that's equivalent. So equivalent means the same. So remember, equals is for numbers. So to say 2 plus 3 equals 4 plus 1 is a type of equivalence. It means that they add up to the same thing. In this case, this equivalence with the three little equals means these are the same thing. So if I say not the P and Q together, that's the same as not P or not Q. And if I do it with the or, then that becomes the and. So not P and not Q. So it puts the two together. Of course, you could put the little squiggly ones instead in front. It means the exact same thing. Not P and Q is the same as not, whoops. I would like to put the not, same not P or Q. Boy. Okay, not P or not Q. And not P or Q together is the same as not P and not Q. So let's look at a few examples. So one thing we've got to think about is what the opposite of things are, like love and hate. So if I say I love you, the opposite is not I hate you. The opposite is I don't love you. Actually, most of you students in this class, I don't even know you. Hopefully I'll get to know some of you during the semester, but I don't love you and I don't hate you either. I don't really know you well enough to love you, and I don't really know you well enough to hate you either. So be careful. The opposite of love is not love. The opposite of hate is not hate. The opposite of happy is not happy. The opposite of unhappy is not unhappy. So the opposite of I am unhappy, so the negation, is I am not unhappy. Okay, so don't do those opposites. Same with cold. The opposite of cold isn't hot. The opposite of cold is not cold. The opposite of hot is not hot. So be careful with those things that are kind of like on a continuum, and we like to think of them as opposites, but they're really not. They're a continuum describing a whole range of things: happiness, coldness, so forth. All right, the example, I do not play well. What's the negation? Of course, I put neg here for negation. I could have just as easily put OPP for opposite. So those mean the same thing. The opposite of I do not play well is I do play well. Okay. The opposite, okay, here's an and. So I could say I run fast. Sometimes when we get more complicated, we're not going to get too complicated in this class, but sometimes when we get more complicated, it's nice to break the two up and say, okay, what do I have here? I have, whoops, not P and P. That would be saying the same thing twice, P and Q. So what's the opposite? The opposite would be not P or not Q. So the opposite would be, I don't run fast. Or I don't win the race. So in other words, if I say to you, I run fast and I win the race, and somebody else says, you're lying, you're not telling the truth. Well, how can I not be telling the truth? I could be not telling the truth if I still ran fast, but I didn't win. Or I could be telling the truth if I won, but I didn't run fast. All right. Okay, so what about this next example? I turn the corner or I crash. So I turn the corner is one proposition. Boy, my writing there is kind of poor. But I turn the corner is one of the propositions, or I crash. So I'm using those little logic symbols, and or. So the opposite would change that to an and. So the opposite, of course, is also known as the negation, is I don't turn the table, the corner. I don't turn the corner. And I don't crash. If I'm saying I did either one and you're accusing me of lying, not telling the truth, then that means I didn't do either one. Okay. All right, let's try this one. I eat too fast, but I do not get a tummy ache. So here's an interesting thing, that in logic, the word but and the word and really mean the same thing, except but has a bit of surprise to it. I eat too fast and I do not get a tummy ache. The reason I say but is just like, oh, it's a little surprising I didn't get a tummy ache given I ate too much. So when you see the word but in logic, it's the same thing as and. So I eat too fast and I do not get a tummy ache. So the opposite is going to be I don't eat too fast. So I don't eat too fast. Or I do get a tummy ache. And of course, in this case, I do not have to write the word do. So I could say I don't eat too fast or I get a tummy ache. So that would be the opposite. Now, last week we were looking at the if-then truth tables, and we're a little surprised about the if-thens, because the if-then, a true, then a true is true. If true, then a false is false. So those two weren't surprising. But if a false, then a true, or if a false, then a false is true. So that's surprising. And the reason is because if I have P implies Q, that's the same thing as not P or Q. And instead of that one, I could write the little squiggly one. So if I say if P then Q, it's really the same thing as not P or Q. Then what's the opposite of that? So then the opposite of P implies Q would be the opposite of not P or Q, which would be P and not Q. And in this case, I often like to make that and a but. So this and right here is often thought as but it's an and, right? This and is often thought of as a but. So look at this example. If I study hard, then I pass the test. So the opposite or the negation, however you want to call it, the opposite or the negation is I do study hard. And, or if you want to put, but I do not pass the test. Now you kind of see why I might put the word but there instead of and. I study hard and I do not pass the test. That's the opposite. Another way of saying, if you study hard, then you pass the test. I did study hard, but I did pass the test. That's the opposite. All right, so the opposite of the if then is the I did the first part, but the second part didn't happen. So P and not Q. So the if part and not the then part. All right, so let's do this example. If I do not panic, then I win the game. So what would the opposite be? Okay, I'm going to do this part. So I do not panic. That part's staying the same, just like it did here. I study hard, I study hard. I do not panic, but, or and, either way, I do not win the game. So you have the opposite of the if then turning into if the first part and or but, not the then part. So that's the opposite negation of the if then, and the DeMorgans laws, which are the opposite of the and the or.